Introduction. The vast expanse of the galaxy teemed with life, an interconnected network of civilizations, cultures, and alliances. The Consortium of Sapient Species, CSS, the governing body of interstellar diplomacy, had long cataloged every known species and their unique abilities. The towering Helantha boasted psychokinetic strength. The crystalline Quar held the power of instantaneous communication across light years. The Spherians could manipulate light itself. Yet, in all their meticulous documentation, one species defied classification: humanity. When humans emerged on the intergalactic stage, the CSS observed them with curiosity and mild unease. Despite being a physically fragile species, unable to breathe in most atmospheres, susceptible to disease, and relying on technology to traverse the stars, they quickly became a force to be reckoned with. Their adaptability, determination, and peculiar creativity set them apart. But what truly unsettled other species was something more abstract. It wasn't their technology or resourcefulness. It wasn't even their penchant for violence. It was a quality no one could define, something hidden behind their eyes and buried in the cadence of their words. It was subtle at first. A human diplomat would enter a negotiation, and soon the opposing side would find themselves conceding far more than they intended. A human explorer would establish contact with a hostile alien race, and within weeks, an alliance would be forged. Wars stopped. Economies shifted. Revolutions sprouted from whispers in the dark. And always, somewhere in the mix, there was a human pulling strings, deliberately or not. The CSS classified it as social persuasion anomaly, type H, but privately, many called it something simpler: the whisper. No one could explain how it worked, only that it did. Attempts to study it failed. The power was subtle, slippery, and maddeningly inconsistent. Worse still, most humans seemed unaware they possessed it. To them, their influence was merely the result of charisma, logic, or luck. But deep in the heart of consortium-controlled space, rumors spread of a human who had taken the whisper to terrifying extremes, a being capable of bending entire civilizations to their will. And while the rumors were unconfirmed, the whispers were enough to warrant action. The CSS ordered an investigation, for if the whisper truly existed in its most dangerous form, it was not merely a power, it was a weapon, and humanity had become its master. The investigation began on Vorthal 4, a lush jungle world, where trade negotiations between humanity and the enigmatic Zithri had recently collapsed. The Zithri, a race of emotionless bioluminescent beings, were infamous for their stoicism and resistance to manipulation. Yet, inexplicably, their delegation had left the talks in a state of near panic, abandoning their long-held neutrality. In the shadow of Vorthal's towering emerald canopy, CSS operative Kellen Tharvin reviewed the case files with growing apprehension. Her species, the telepathic Lasari, prided themselves on detecting deception and unraveling motives. Yet even she felt a chill as she studied the human involved, Commander Elias Vance. Vance was a rising star in the United Terran Federation. His record was spotless, too spotless. Successful negotiations on 5 major worlds. The de-escalation of 2 interspecies conflicts, and now a collapsed Zithri alliance. Official reports painted him as a charismatic, forward-thinking leader. But Kellen saw something else in his eyes, captured in the still holographs. Something hungry. Her communicator chirped, breaking her concentration. Operative Tharvin, a disembodied voice announced, "Your transport to the human embassy is ready. The CSS Council expects your report within 2 cycles." Kellen sighed, glancing out the viewport. Rain cascaded over the shuttle's metallic hull, tracing jagged lines against the dense jungle beyond. She tightened her grip on the case file. Understood. I'll proceed immediately. As the shuttle hummed to life and lifted off the landing pad, Kellen couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't heading toward a simple investigation. She was heading straight into the heart of the most dangerous mystery in the galaxy. And Elias Vance was waiting. Chapter 1. The Whisperer. The human embassy on Vorthal 4 was a stark contrast to the jungle world surrounding it. Sleek and angular, the blackened silver structure shimmered under the steady rain, its surface rippling faintly with a protective energy field. Kellen Tharvin stepped onto the landing platform, her boots clicking against the polished surface. Her Lasari senses prickled. This place felt wrong, not in the physical sense, but in the subtle, intangible way that set her kind apart. The embassy vibrated with something unseen, a presence that slithered beneath the surface of reality. A human staffer, a young woman with sharp eyes and an overly rehearsed smile, greeted her at the entrance. Operative Tharvin, welcome to the United Terran Federation Embassy. Commander Vance has been expecting you. Of course he has, Kellen thought grimly. Take me to him, she said, her tone clipped. The interior of the embassy was as immaculate as its exterior. Every surface gleamed with precision, and every staff member moved with an air of quiet efficiency. Yet Kellen noticed the way they avoided eye contact, the way their steps quickened when they thought no one was watching. Fear. They were afraid of something or someone. Finally, the staffer led her to a wide set of double doors. Commander Vance is inside, the woman said, hesitating for a fraction of a second before gesturing for Kellen to enter. The doors slid open soundlessly, revealing a spacious office dominated by a large observation window. Outside, the jungle stretched endlessly, a sea of green broken only by flashes of bioluminescent flora. The man standing before the window didn't turn as Kellen entered. Commander Vance, she said, her voice firm. Operative Tharvin, he replied, his tone warm and inviting. He turned, and for the first time, she saw the man whose name had become a whispered warning in consortium halls. Elias Vance was unremarkable in appearance, average height, average build, with neatly combed brown hair and sharp gray eyes. But those eyes, they locked onto hers with a focus so intense it felt like a physical weight. Kellen resisted the urge to flinch. Thank you for coming, Vance continued, gesturing toward a chair. Please have a seat. I imagine you have questions. Kellen didn't move. This isn't a courtesy visit, Commander. The CSS has concerns about your activities on Vorthal 4. Concerns? Vance's lips twitched into a faint smile. I didn't realize peaceful negotiations were cause for alarm. Peaceful? Kellen snapped. The Zithari delegation fled the table in a state of disarray. Their envoys, beings who have no concept of fear, described you as a shadow crawling into their minds. What exactly did you say to them? Vance's expression didn't change. I only spoke the truth. If they found it unsettling, that's hardly my fault. Kellen took a step closer, her telepathic senses probing the edges of his mind. But the moment she reached for his thoughts, she recoiled as if burned. His consciousness was wrong. It was layered, like a labyrinth of mirrors, each reflection more distorted than the last. You're blocking me, she said, her voice sharp. No, Vance replied calmly. You're simply seeing what you want to see. That's how your kind works, isn't it? You sift through thoughts, piecing together the narrative that suits your needs. Kellen's fist clenched. You're deflecting. I'm enlightening, Vance corrected, stepping closer. You and the CSS fear what you can't control. But tell me, Operative, have you ever considered that perhaps the whisper isn't a power? Perhaps it's simply truth. Kellen felt the room tilt around her. His words weren't loud, but they carried a weight that burrowed into her mind, twisting her thoughts like vines. She steadied herself, breaking eye contact. Whatever game you're playing, it ends now. The CSS has authorized me to remove you from this post and take you into custody for further investigation. Vance tilted his head, his smile widening. And what exactly do you plan to charge me with? Being persuasive, he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You don't understand, do you? This isn't something you can lock away or study in a lab. It's not a weapon. It's not even unique to me. It's humanity itself. Kellen's breath hitched as his words clawed at something deep within her, a primal, buried instinct she couldn't name. She forced herself to focus, her telepathic defenses slamming into place. Enough. You will come with me willingly, or I'll. You'll what? Vance interrupted, his tone still maddeningly calm. Force me? Go ahead. Try. But I'd be careful if I were you. The more you fight it, the more it fights back. Suddenly, Kellen realized her hand was trembling. She stared at it, horrified, as Vance's voice wrapped around her like a vice. Do you feel it? He murmured. That's the truth. That's humanity's power. It's not persuasion. It's the ability to make you see yourself. Your fears, your flaws, your limits. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. Kellen staggered back, her mind reeling. She had faced warlords, assassins, and telepathic predators, but this was different. Vance wasn't attacking her. He was unraveling her. I'll give you a choice, he said softly. Walk away now and tell the CSS whatever you need to. Or stay, and learn what it means to truly understand. But I warn you, Operative, knowledge comes at a price. Kellen stumbled out of the office minutes later, her thoughts a tangled mess. The human staffer was waiting outside, her expression neutral. Did the commander agree to cooperate? The woman asked. Kellen looked at her, struggling to form words. Finally, she shook her head. I need to report to the CSS. She walked away, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Behind her, Elias Vance watched through the observation window, his expression unreadable. Chapter 2. The Weight of Truth. Kellen Tharvin's shuttle streaked through the atmosphere of Vorthal 4, its engines a dull hum beneath the tension coiling in her chest. Her report to the consortium was overdue, but she couldn't bring herself to compose it. Words failed to capture the enormity of what she'd just experienced. Commander Elias Vance wasn't a diplomat. He was something else entirely. She replayed his words over and over, like a melody that wouldn't leave her mind. It's not persuasion. It's the ability to make you see yourself. The concept gnawed at her. Her people, the Lasari, had evolved to delve into the minds of others, unearthing motives, fears, and secrets. Yet Vance's influence bypassed her telepathic defenses entirely. How could something so subtle feel so devastating? The communicator on her wrist buzzed, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. Operative Tharvin, report your findings, a stern voice commanded. It was High Chancellor Relectar of the CSS, his tone clipped and impatient. Kellen hesitated. The situation is complicated, she began. Commander Vance exhibits behavior consistent with the anomalies reported by the Zithri delegation. However, I need more time to fully assess his capabilities. More time. Relec's voice rose. The Zithri are on the verge of severing all trade agreements, and the Tralos Alliance has already accused humanity of subterfuge. We need answers now, Tharvin. What is the nature of this so-called whisper? Kellen swallowed hard. The question was deceptively simple, but the answer eluded her. It's not a single ability, she said finally. It's something intrinsic to their species, a way they interact with others, not just through words but through presence. It destabilizes, reframes, and she faltered. It's dangerous, Chancellor. A long silence followed. When Relek spoke again, his voice was colder than before. Then you understand why the CSS cannot tolerate such a threat. If this whisper is not confined to Vance alone, humanity must be contained. Return to the embassy immediately and secure the commander for transport to Consortium custody. Use force if necessary. Kellen's stomach churned. Chancellor, I don't think force will work. Operative Tharvin, Relek interrupted sharply. Humanity is a nascent species with limited resources and no standing military in Consortium space. If a single human is too much for you to handle, perhaps I should assign someone more capable. Kellen bristled but held her tongue. Understood, she said, cutting the connection. She glanced at the jungle below as the shuttle circled back toward the human embassy. The rain had stopped, but the skies remained dark, heavy with the threat of another storm. Kellen tightened her grip on her sidearm, its familiar weight a small comfort. If the CSS wanted Elias Vance contained, she would find a way. The embassy was eerily quiet when Kellen returned. The staffers she passed avoided her gaze, their expressions tight with unspoken tension. Something had changed in her brief absence. As she approached Vance's office, her telepathic senses flared again. That same unsettling presence pulsed around her, thicker now, like a fog that clung to her mind. She steeled herself and pushed open the double doors. Vance was seated at his desk, his posture relaxed, as though he'd been expecting her. Back so soon? He asked, his voice carrying that maddening calm. I'm placing you under Consortium custody, Kellen announced, leveling her sidearm at him. You'll cooperate or I'll use force. Vance raised an eyebrow. You don't really believe that will work, do you? Don't test me, she snapped. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her aim steady. Vance leaned back, his gray eyes locking onto hers. Tell me, Operative Tharvin, what do you think is happening here? Do you think I'm controlling you? Manipulating your thoughts like your kind does to others? Kellen didn't answer, but the accusation struck a nerve. That's not what's happening, Vance continued. I don't control minds. I don't need to. All I do is show people what's already there. The parts of themselves they try to ignore. The parts they fear. Enough, Kellen said through gritted teeth. You're coming with me? Vance's gaze softened, and for a moment, she saw something almost pitying. Do you know why your people can't understand us, Kellen? Why the Consortium fears us? It's because humanity doesn't run from its darkness. We embrace it. We wield it. And that terrifies you. Kellen's finger twitched on the trigger, but she couldn't pull it. Every word he spoke dug deeper, dragging her thoughts into places she didn't want to go. Memories of her failures, her doubts, her compromises. All the cracks in the carefully constructed image of herself she presented to the world. I don't want to hurt you, Vance said quietly. But if you force this, you'll only hurt yourself. Kellen's knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, gasping for breath. Her mental defenses crumbled under the weight of his presence, leaving her exposed. Tears blurred her vision as the shame of her own vulnerabilities overwhelmed her. How? She choked out, clutching her head. Vance knelt beside her, his expression devoid of malice. It's not power, Kellen. It's understanding. Humans see what others won't. We reflect it back. That's the whisper. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Kellen looked up at him, her voice trembling. What are you going to do? Vance stood, his gaze distant. The question isn't what I'm going to do. It's what you'll choose to do now that you've seen the truth. As Kellen stumbled out of the office, she felt a strange clarity amidst the chaos of her thoughts. She'd come to capture a man, but she'd found something far more terrifying. A mirror held up to her soul. And as she boarded her shuttle, one thought consumed her. How do you fight an enemy who doesn't attack, but simply reveals? Final chapter, Reflection. The CSS briefing chamber was bathed in cold, sterile light. Its circular walls were lined with tiered seating, where consortium delegates from dozens of species stared down at Kellen Tharvin. Her appearance betrayed the weight of her ordeal. Dark circles under her eyes, her normally steady posture trembling at the edges. High Chancellor Relectar sat at the central podium, his imposing form framed by holographic displays. Operative Tharvin, he began, his voice heavy with impatience. You were instructed to detain Commander Elias Vance. Yet you've returned without him, bearing no actionable intelligence. Explain yourself. Kellen's gaze swept across the chamber. The collective eyes of the galaxy bore into her, skeptical, expectant, and hostile. She swallowed hard, steeling herself. Commander Vance is unlike anyone I've ever encountered, she began. He embodies what we've come to call the whisper, but it's more than persuasion, more than manipulation. It's a reflection. Murmurs rippled through the chamber, but Relec's sharp voice cut through them. Reflection? Elaborate? Kellen hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't sound like madness. Humans possess a unique ability to confront and externalize their own weaknesses, fears, and flaws. When they interact with others, they unconsciously expose those same vulnerabilities in their counterparts. They don't control minds, Chancellor. They hold up a mirror. A Trelos delegate leaned forward, his translucent skin glowing faintly. This is nonsense. Are you suggesting their power is self-awareness? Not just self-awareness, Kellen countered, her voice gaining strength. It's the way they use it. Humans weaponize truth. They force you to confront the parts of yourself you'd rather ignore, the parts you've buried. And once you see them, you can't go back. You can't unsee. The chamber fell silent, the delegates shifting uncomfortably. Many species in the CSS relied on carefully curated mental constructs to function, hierarchies of thought and emotion that smoothed over primal instincts. To expose those hidden truths was unthinkable, preposterous. Relec snapped. This is philosophical drivel, not evidence. Commander Vance destabilized the Zithri delegation and jeopardized interstellar diplomacy. That is a fact. What you describe sounds like nothing more than exaggerated charisma. Kellen clenched her fists, frustration boiling within her. It's more than that, Chancellor. I felt it myself. He didn't threaten me or force me into anything, but his presence, his words, they unraveled me. My training, my defenses, they didn't matter. He made me see my own doubts, my own failures. And it's not just him. It's humanity as a whole. They don't even realize they're doing it, but they force everyone around them to face the truth. A hulking Halantha delegate rumbled with disbelief. And what would you have us do, Operative? Quarantine their entire species for speaking truth? Kellen's shoulders sagged. I don't have an answer, but ignoring this won't make it go away. Humanity isn't like any other species we've encountered. They don't fit into our systems, our hierarchies, our rules. And if we're not careful, They'll remake the galaxy in their image, not through war, but by reshaping the way we think. Relek's eyes narrowed. Do you realize what you're suggesting? If humanity poses such a fundamental threat, the consortium would have no choice but to act. Drastic measures may be required. Kellen's stomach dropped. What kind of measures? Containment, Relek said coldly. Isolation, perhaps even extinction, if necessary. No! Kellen's voice rang out, startling the assembly. That would only prove their point. You can't fight them by silencing them. That's what makes them dangerous. They thrive in conflict, in adversity. Trying to crush them will only make them stronger. Relek's expression hardened. Then what do you propose, Operative? Kellen's mind raced. She thought of Vance's parting words. The question isn't what I'm going to do. It's what you'll choose to do now that you've seen the truth. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. We need to adapt, she said finally. Instead of fearing humanity's power, we need to understand it, learn from it. The whisper isn't just a weapon, it's a tool, a way to grow. If we let it, it could unite us in ways we've never imagined. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted over one another, their voices a cacophony of dissent and outrage. Kellen stood silently, waiting for the storm to pass. Relek raised a hand, and the chamber fell quiet once more. He studied Kellen with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. You ask us to embrace what we fear most. Do you truly believe the consortium can survive such a fundamental shift? Kellen met his gaze, her voice unwavering. I believe we can't survive without it. Epilogue. Months later, Kellen stood on a remote observation platform, staring out at the stars. The CSS had neither embraced nor fully rejected her recommendations. Instead, they had imposed tighter restrictions on humanity, monitoring their movements and communications more closely than ever before. It was a fragile compromise, born of fear and uncertainty. She had not seen Elias Vance since that fateful day on Vorthal 4, but his presence lingered in her thoughts. His words, his gaze, they haunted her, shaping her every decision. The whisper wasn't just humanity's power. It was a challenge, a choice. And deep down, Kellen knew the galaxy would never be the same. For better or worse, the age of humanity had begun.